What is up, you guys? Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Burgundy Years Podcast. This week we've got a special guest. His name is Zac McGowen. He's a local bud of mine from my hometown. I met him through him shopping at my record store. My brother also attends the church where he's an associate pastor. But what makes Zac's story really cool is that he actually worked for Family Christian Bookstore for a while, and he got to work in their music merchandise section. So he worked a lot with picking what albums were going to be in stock, of how much, what kind of bands they were going to promote and have in their store. And he's got some really awesome background knowledge of this amazing era of Christian music. Though he's not necessarily a famous musician from this era, he's got a lot of knowledge, and he's just a massive fan, and it's always very refreshing to talk to somebody who is a massive fan of this kind of music. So I really think you're going to enjoy the conversation that Zac and I have in episode 2. I hope that you'll stick around. If you're new, thanks so much for joining us. We so appreciate you coming on to the Burgundy Years Pod and giving us a listen. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram. You can also send us an email if you'd like at burgundyyearspod@gmail.com. Let us know what you think of the episode. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Zac McGowen on the Burgundy Years Podcast. Right. Well, we are here with Zac McGowen. Zac, first of all, tell us your position in your church so that we kind of get an idea of what you do for a living. And then I just want to jump right into all this content because you've listed off some bands here that I'm just so excited to cover.
Yeah. So I am an associate pastor, the associate pastor at First Presbyterian Church here in Lakeland, Florida. I've been at this position for the last 7 years, but I've been in the Lakeland community for 22 years now. So yeah,
wow.
I've been here a long time. Yeah.
Very cool. Are you born and raised in Lakeland?
No. Originally from Birmingham, Alabama, but I came and for those that are in the Lakeland community, I came to Florida Southern College in 1998, and I never left Polk County. It got its claws in me, and
it does that to people,
yeah, it does. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I'm born and raised. I don't know what it's like to live outside of this town.
It's a different world out there. It's a different world. That's right.
People keep telling me you gotta move out and you gotta try it. I'm like, do I though? Really? Because it seems like everybody that comes here doesn't want to leave. Yeah. So obviously something's going right.
I lived all over the place when I was a kid, and we were a military family, and so we moved around a lot. And they would always tell me when I was growing up, people would tell me, other military kids would say, "Oh, you're going to get the itch. You're going to want to move every 2-3 years." I said no. No, I do not like to move. I'm a planter. I'm a stayer. If God leads someplace else, then God leads someplace else. But He's really going to have to get my attention to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, well, my next thing that I want to cover is, if you wouldn't mind kind of breaking down. People are probably like, why do you have Zac McGowen on your podcast, Jessi? Well, I want them to know why. You and I have had these conversations before, but I would like for our audience to hear what exactly got you kind of delved in this kind of era of music, this genre of music, these bands, and just kind of give a little bit of background about that.
Yeah, well, so I could go far back to when I first started listening to these bands, in high school, but probably the reason that you and I are talking is because I was at here in Lakeland. We had a very large Family Christian Bookstore, and I started working there in 1999. I was hired on as holiday help in 1999 when it was a shoebox Christian bookstore in the local mall. And so I was hired to kind of help transition from the inside to the outside. And because of my interest in music anyway, I latched on to the music department there. And when we moved to the exterior location of the mall into its standalone position, I can't remember how many, it was like 30,000 square feet of retail space.
It's huge.
It was a huge store. I was actually, when we opened the doors, that was the third largest Family Christian bookstore in the country.
Oh,
And
I didn't know
so
that.
it put us in the top 10 of all Christian book distributors in the country. So whether you're dealing with Lifeway or whatever. And so they had a head of the music department when I got there. He was graduating college, and so he moved on pretty quickly after the store opened. And so there was another guy who was kind of ahead of me, and he was the head of the music department for about 2 or 3 months, and then he moved on to do other things. So I became the head of the music department for Family Christian Bookstore here in Lakeland, and I was that for a good 18 months. And I purchased all the music, I stocked all the music, anything that, I was the one that set the ordering for what we would have and what we didn't have. I knew when all the releases were, and so I made it a point. My predecessors, they were great at making a point of stocking not your down the middle Christian music. I mean, we had that obviously, but they were really concerned about bringing in bands off of the Tooth and Nail label and the subsidiary labels, and bringing bands, getting some ordering in from some of those bands, because Lakeland had a pretty robust kind of local music scene too.
They did. Yes, they did.
And Christian bands too. And also we had a fair-sized venue here that hosted pretty big-name Christian artists at Carpenter's Home Church. I mean, we have Newsboys and Audio Adrenaline and all them. But then they would also bring in, supporting acts that were lesser known. And so we would, be stocking some of their CDs and things like that when most Christian bookstores weren't stocking those at a significant, significant inventory. So that's kind of how that's where you and I have really connected, because you do retail, and so it was always interesting making those decisions. Sitting at the really old computer and having to convince my manager that I wasn't an idiot for stocking, a Living Sacrifice album, at 3 times the recommended amount. They'd give us recommendations for how many to stock. And some people would just hit, enter, and that was exactly what they stocked. But I would have the latitude to adjust those stocks. And so, having the full range of Starflyer 59 records, like always on hand, that was something that maybe other Christian bookstores did that. Not to the quantities that we did, because we had a market for it. And also too, because it was just great, and they deserved to be kind of heard and be on the shelf next to, the other kind of more main, middle of the road kind of artists as well too. So that was a lot of fun during that time.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun during that time.
Being a record store owner, I get to do something similar to that for sure. And it's one of the best parts of the job, is like getting to choose not just what your customers are going to listen to, but you get to implement some of your own taste into things.
Yeah.
And it just makes it so much fun. But we even connect further than that, because my brother, who
That's right.
And I grew up going to that Family Christian Bookstore, and every Saturday we lived in Mulberry, so it was like, for people that don't live in Lakeland, Florida, Mulberry is like basically 30 minutes south, even though it's technically in the same town. It's like 30 minutes south of this Family Christian Bookstore. And on the weekends, my parents would load us up and we'd drive to the north side of town, and we would go to Family Christian Bookstore, and my parents would be like, okay, you've got a $10 budget and an hour and a half, go find something.
Yeah.
And we did that every weekend for years.
Oh man.
And so you were picking stuff that my brother and I were turning around and buying every weekend, which is ironic that it kind of turned out that way. But yeah, that Family Christian Bookstore, I have been into a ton of Christian bookstores, because when we were growing up, when we would go on vacation or anything like that, we would always try to find things like that to support when we were out, and none of them had the music selection that ours had.
So to back up a little bit, one of the things that got me was when I was in high school, when I even got into the kind of the Christian alternative kind of music scene in high school, I was not really, I mean, my dad was a pastor, but I was not really what I would consider a believer at that point, but I still went to all the conferences, and And one of the reasons I didn't, Christianity in general didn't resonate with me was because I felt like the majority of that music was so kind of thin. But what changed it for me was we went to some youth conference, and at this youth conference, I think the Newsboys were probably headlining something. It was a huge deal. It was in Tennessee, outside of Pigeon Forge. And one of the bands that was in support of, Newsboys was Plank Eye.
Oh, yeah.
And that Spill record was the very first kind of Christian alternative, non-mainstream sort of record I ever bought, that CD. And I listened to it, and I was like, no way. I was like, this is like real music to me. Yeah. And we went to, at that same conference, during that same time, we went to a Christian bookstore while we were there. It was a big one. I can't remember what it was, but it was a huge one. And I bought, I was like, I got to find more kind of stuff like this that's just kind of, has the message, or it comes from that same place, but the music is a lot more, the musicality is as important as anything else.
Right.
And that's when I got the Life in General record from MXPX. Mm-hmm. And that really changed a lot for me, because I was like, these are guys that at that time, they were Christians, but they were just from a Christian perspective. They weren't singing about Jesus necessarily. Whereas Plank Eye was a lot more direct in their lyrical content, where MXPX was just like, we're Christians. That's kind of the underlying, operating system, but we're not going to sing about it all the time. We're going to sing about, being in high school, and we're going to sing about, what it means to live away from a girlfriend and those sorts of things. And that was like, oh, you can do that. I didn't know you could do that. And then that, I think the Life in General record is the one they had the mainstream hit in secular music, whatever, with Chick Magnet. And I thought that was just so much fun. But that's really, so when I got into Christian retail, I was like, that mattered to me. That was a part of my faith journey. Absolutely. And I wanted that to be a part of somebody else's faith journey. If there was somebody kind of on the border and they wanted to hear music that really resonated with them. So that was really important for me. And so I got to also direct people too. I mean, one of the things that you get to do in the record store is kind of say, and I know you've done this for me, just picking out a record, say, oh, have you heard this record? I never heard this record. So I buy it. I'm like, man, this is really awesome. Yeah. I got to do that for people in the Christian music world as well. And so that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun. Yeah.
And we almost have like two sides of the same coin situation, because for me, I was like a young kid when MXPX was in their heyday. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I don't know what life is like without MXPX. Like people like that, they've always been in my life. But my parents, my dad started getting into Christian rock when he was in high school in the 70s and early 80s. And so as kids, they just always encouraged my brother and I to look for stuff like that. But it was never like, hey, just listen to... Now, we did listen to Newsboys and DC Talk and Audio Journal, the big, the big names. But that's kind of what the beauty of that Family Christian Bookstore experience was like, because my parents didn't give us limits on what we were picking out, because they knew it was coming from a place of faith. So, my brother and I would bring home stuff like MXPX, Plank Eye, the Supertones, like all these bands. And it was, you hit it right on the head. It's not just that it's faith-based music, because I like to call this era more faith-based music than necessarily Christian music.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not just that it was that. It's that it's actually like MXPX in secular world, in the secular industry, is considered like a really, really classic punk band.
Of course, yeah.
So, and you just don't get that kind of, and I don't want to harp on Christian music now, but you just don't get that anymore. Like, it's just not there. There's something, I don't know where it shifted, but something shifted, and it's just not the same.
Yeah, it was interesting when you say that about MXPX. I remember the one and only time I've ever seen them live. They were at Janus Landing in St. Petersburg, and they, like, Newfound Glory opened for them. And it was an incredible show. But I think, I started, when you reached out to me to be on, I started wondering, like, what is that today? Like, why has it? Because I went looking, is this stuff? I mean, some of the bands that we listen to, they're still making music. You know, Starflyer 59 still making music.
Five Iron.
Five Iron Frenzy. You know, Project 86 just re-released their self-titled album. MXPX, which is not really identifying as faith-based anymore, but they're still putting out music. But it's not like it was before. And I wonder if the desire for a lot of bands, you know, faith-based bands, Christian bands or whatever, to hit the mainstream kind of leveled that out, or if I find that there's so much in regular pop music that has taken on a faith-based kind of element. And
absolutely.
And I think some of the traditionally Christian music publishers shifted their attention more towards rap and hip hop with, you know, you get guys like Lecrae and stuff, and so they've blown up. But yeah, it's different. I definitely feel like that was an era.
It really was. Yeah. I feel like a lot of, just from my observation, I feel like a lot of what happened, well, for one thing, that era was rock and roll. It was punk, it was alternative. And that's just, even in mainstream media, that it's not cool to listen to that anymore. Like, it's just not, it's not what's popular. And so to me, I think a lot of the Christian labels kind of saw that shift happening and said, okay, we've got to focus more on, like I listened to, I worked for them for a couple of years, but I listened to like For King and Country. They're an incredible band. They're amazing. And I think they would consider themselves a Christian band, but I do think that they can be more considered faith-based because they have more broad ideas in their music, but they're very pop and they're like one of the biggest names on planet Earth in that industry right now. But I don't know. It's just, I feel like that whole alternative scene wasn't cultivated to bring in new generations the way that pop and hip hop, because hip hop was still happening. Christian hip hop was happening in the 90s and in the 80s. Like, it was happening.
Oh yeah.
But it was kind of like generational. Like, people are like, okay, I'm passing the torch along. I'm doing this. Whereas I feel like the alternative scene, and I know that Tooth and Nail is still active and Solid State's still active, but it just, I don't know, there was just like a shift that happened, and it's just not quite what it used to be. And I think the whole like hardcore metal thing kind of also, you know, stemmed it off to something else too. So because I think that's more of what they sign. If they're going to sign harder rock, I think that's more of what they're going to sign nowadays. But
well, and we are talking about, I think even just from a mainstream kind of secular music, we're talking about pretty niche genres anyway. I mean, think about Starflyer 59, like one of my favorite bands from that era. I mean, they're like shoegaze type. That was, I mean, not a whole lot of mainstream, or not even mainstream, secular bands that you point to and go, yeah, I think the general population knows who My Bloody Valentine is. You know, that, like, they don't, like, they're not, that's like, we're already talking about pretty niche genres as it is. And then we're taking niche genres and then we're like slicing it even thinner. But I, you know, I was so appreciative of that era, and I still am. I mean, I still go back and listen to those, and I'm just like, man, this really resonates still with me.
It does,
you know,
and even not even just sound, but like lyrical quality. To me, it's better. I mean, there's just something about, like, I was just sitting here looking at your list, like looking at like Stave Zaker is a big one from our childhood, and Mark Solomon and the guys in that band just had a way of like connecting. And you feel like one of my favorite songs by them is Gold and Silver.
Oh my gosh.
And it's just such a dynamic, beautifully written. I mean, it's something that I feel like a lot of times people tell me, like, if I play Christian music for them, they're like, yeah, that doesn't sound as good as like what their regular counterpart in mainstream media is. But I feel like you play something like Gold and Silver from Stave Zaker, and it transcends all of that boundary, that invisible boundary that people have created. And And it's just, it's not being replicated anymore. Like Christian music in a lot of ways to me has become very canned. It's like, let's put it in a little box and present it on a pretty plate with a bow. And I think what made this era so important in Christian music is that they were like, screw that. Like, we're not doing that. We're going to go out and do what we want to do. And we're going to take influence from these mainstream bands that we're listening to and create it in a way that we want. And I think that's kind of what makes it so important, because to me, you couldn't have a lot of modern Christian music now. Maybe worship would be a different element, but you couldn't have modern contemporary Christian music without some of these bands that were on the underground at the time.
Yeah. Well, and you think about, to Stavesacre, that was one of those bands that I just, I fell in love with. I think the first record I ever heard from them was Speakeasy, and then I went back to Friction and some of the earlier stuff. But, one of the things I really appreciated about them and bands like them was that I did not feel when I was listening to them as though they were trying to be another kind of band. Like, I didn't feel like they were trying to replicate some secular sound. And I think that's not always the case with Christian music, and it's not to say that there are not bands that share commonalities, and that's okay. Even when you go nowadays, you go to like Spotify or you go to Apple Music or something, at the bottom it'll say, bands similar bands or bands you might like, based on that. But when Stavesacre, like that Speakeasy record, I heard that, it was just a great front to back album. To me, I felt like that was one of those that it was unique. I felt like it had a unique sound. I felt like Mark Solomon's vocals.
His voice. His voice is so interesting.
But even the way they would layer, the way they would layer their chords and some of the breaks, to me, that was stuff that I wasn't hearing anywhere. Yeah. And maybe I wasn't listening in the right places, but I wasn't hearing that really anywhere. I mean, you could pick up little influences here and there, but to me, it was a totally unique piece of art just on its own terms. And that I think that's what really set apart some of these faith-based and Christian bands, because they were not explicitly trying to be anybody else, and it showed. Even if they had sounds like somebody else, it didn't feel like they were trying to do that. You know what I'm saying?
Right. It was very natural. Yeah. I mean, obviously these kids, these 20-somethings that are making music at the time, are going to get influence from Nirvana and Soundgarden and like all of these things, because they're just, it's saturated in culture. You can't really get away from it. I mean, even today, Lord, I knew who Nirvana was my entire life, whether I listened to them at a time or not, but to me, like, one that I was going to bring up that I feel similarly about in that way is Grandma Train.
Oh my gosh.
I think that they are, I was listening to them earlier today, and I think that they are one of the greatest Christian alternative bands to exist. Yeah. They're so good. Yeah. The lead singer, I think his name is Peter. He has such a phenomenal voice. Their lyrics are so interesting. Almost like, to me, like they almost kind of blur the line between alternative and like Sunny Day Real Estate kind of emo, because they have very dark lyrics. And I just love them so much. And I agree, there's not anything, I can't think of a secular band that I'm like, oh, Grandma Train sounds just like that band. Yeah. No, and absolutely. I totally get that with Stavesacre. And Mark Solomon's voice alone kind of sets Stavesacre apart. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Grandma Train, the flying album, that was right there. I may have gotten that the same time I got the MXPX album in that shop in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, because I remember having that one for a long time. I felt the same way about that. And it made me really want more and more of that kind of feeling, that kind of vibe. Like, I want people who are informed by their faith, and it informs their life, and sometimes really explicitly, and sometimes not as much. And their passion was real. To me, is very groundbreaking. Absolutely. In a lot of ways, and set
set the path for that next generation. Because I think that Flying record, it came out in like 97.
Mm-hmm.
And so you start seeing kind of more, it starts to really pick up after that, like 97, 98, and into the
because
2000s.
once you tip into like 2000, you start getting more stuff from like Project 86 and Living Sacrifice you mentioned earlier, although Living Sacrifice started, I think, in the 90s.
They've been around, man.
A long time.
But you know what?
Sure.
And Living Sacrifice, they, like you talked about MXPX, Living Sacrifice has been a gold standard sort of metal band. I mean, I remember I read an article once about, their goal was to be the fastest, loudest, and hardest. And man, some of those records, you're like, I don't know if I could find another metal band that played faster, played louder, played harder. But then you dive into those lyrics and you're just like, man, they're dealing with stuff at that level of faith.
Yeah.
And I think, but the respect from the broader industry was they weren't just resting on faith to give them an audience. And see, I think that's some of it. Some of the Christian music scene, and I'm with you, I don't like to dog a whole scene, but some of it is they're resting on the fact that we're going to slap a CCM label on it, and then we're going to have an automatic audience. Whereas Living Sacrifice and Grandma Train and Stavesacre, they're like, well, no, we want to be the best musicians we can be because of our faith, and we want to put out quality music, period, that's informed by our faith. And I think it's hard to put your finger on exactly what that is, but you can hear it and you recognize it when you hear it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think of people like going in towards the 2000s, like Blindside was a big one for us.
Yeah.
I know you and I have connected on Blindside before. Further Seems Forever. Who else was coming out at that time? You get more into like the more quote screamo hardcore stuff, like Beloved, Emery. All that stuff was still super quality content. I was a big fan of Demon Hunter for a long time. I still like Demon Hunter, but it starts to be, it goes through like this weird like hourglass kind of shape. It's like broad, and then it gets kind of narrow, and then it gets broad, and then it kind of just ends again. But I mean, it's, we spoke about this right before we started recording. I don't know a lot of people, and this is one reason why I wanted to start this podcast. I don't know a lot of people that are returning to this music very often. I think they've had experiences with it, but I don't think they're consistently returning to it. And as somebody that consistently returns to it, I try to cultivate relationships with people who are also returning to it, because this music, I feel like I've had so many customers in my store that we connect on our faith and everything, and I'll be like, "What do you listen to Christian music?" No, Christian music it's so corny.
Yeah, it's trite.
And I'm like, and I'm like, well, have you listened to like this or this? And they're like, I don't know who that is, and I'm like,
here you go. That's right.
Yeah, it's all, you're sitting here shopping for Led Zeppelin records, but you're not willing to go back and look at Christian. But that's the problem, is that, and this is a bone I want to pick with a lot of people, is that the Christian industry doesn't celebrate those artists.
No, they
ever.
don't.
They don't, they don't get, like, for example, Jesus Freaks by DC Talk is turning 25 the week that you and I are recording right now this week. And you're not seeing people really post about it.
Yeah, and that's kind of
and that's a cornerstone record right there. Like, that is like pinnacle.
Yeah, because whatever you want to say about DC Talk, because I've always had kind of like this, this weird relationship with DC Talk, but Jesus Freak, really, there was some songs on there I was like, okay, wow, that's some really crazy like ability there, and they were kind of that Christian pop thing, but they were, in that record specifically, they weren't afraid to do some stuff that was not super pop and mainstream, and we don't, we recycle things pretty well in the Christian music industry. They recycle things pretty well, but they don't celebrate a whole lot. And they especially don't celebrate things on the fringes. But even DC Talk, I mean, that's not in the fringe. That's right down the middle.
No,
that's right down
absolutely.
that's a centerpiece kind of record. And
absolutely.
It is kind of funny.
And you know what? Maybe I'll eat my words, and later this week I'll read like 800 articles about them. But it's just I just don't. And that's like, I use them as an example because they are like. That album is probably one of the greatest Christian albums to ever be published. And so the fact that the Christian industry doesn't even shed spotlight on stuff like that, these bands that we speak about today, they're getting no attention. None at all. Well, even from the labels that they were on, they're not getting much attention. So,
if DC Talk, I mean, can't get the attention because, I mean, you got Toby Mac and Michael. I mean, these people have gone on for tremendous careers on their own.
Yeah.
Absent of DC Talk, you got no hope for even bands that were huge, having any kind of lasting kind of getting that staying power or whatever. But I'm like I'm like you. One of the great things about streaming today is that you can go back and find music from these bands that you're like, oh man, I didn't even know that existed.
Right.
I happened to be listening to old Stave Saker records a couple of years ago through Apple Music when it first came out. I started, keeping playlists together so I always have it, to find out that they were releasing another one, like a couple of years ago. And I was like so jazzed about that, and I probably listened to that. I have kind of a commute. I listened to that on repeat for a solid week and a half because it just was like to have new music that sounded and that brought back all that from, the late 90s and early 2000s was so refreshing to me. And with new lyrical content and a different passion, and they're all a little older and more mature, and you can kind of hear that in the music. But yeah, that's the great thing about streaming is you can go back and for free, relatively speaking, go back and keep up with those bands that we loved. So
absolutely. And what's interesting? The last concert that I saw of 2020, because the whole year has been just nothing but chaos.
Yeah.
But in January, I saw MXPX.
Oh wow!
And Five Iron Frenzy opened for them, and I was sitting there with my dad, and I was like, MXPX. It doesn't surprise me as much because, like I said previously, I do believe that they are considered a great pop punk band in the industry as a whole. But the crowd that was responding to Five Iron, they have a massive following. Yeah. And unless you really are tapped into who they are or like what era they come from, nobody knows that kind of nobody listens to. Who's listening to ska music anymore? I mean, not that it doesn't exist and that there aren't fans of it, but like that was another like subgenre that Christian artists kind of got into. Is there was a lot of ska bands that were popping up, but you just don't really hear about that stuff anymore. But Five Iron is like, if I feel like if industry tycoons would look at how many people are flocking to hear these bands, they might consider it, hey, maybe we should shed some light. Now, part of this is coming from my irritation that these records aren't getting reissued onto vinyl enough. And that's kind of part of my the thorn in my side is I'm like, we could bring a lot of recognition to these bands again if you would just press this on vinyl. Yeah. And I think the people that love vinyl, like me, we all love it for different reasons, but just to have that physical copy again, because most of us, I mean, I maybe this is sacrilege. I mean, I don't have a lot of those CDs anymore, one, because they got warped and whatever, but also too, I mean, we didn't, this era of faith-based and Christian music missed the resurgence of vinyl. So now all artists, are releasing on vinyl because it makes them a heck of a lot more money. But also for the fans, to have that physical record with the big artwork and the liner notes, there's something visceral about that. And it would be really cool. I mean, I could see,
the old Starflyer albums coming out on vinyl and having those. I picked up, I think from your store, I think I picked up an old Sunny Day Real Estate, but that had been reissued. I'm thinking, that would be so cool if like Tooth and Nail went back and went back to their old catalog and reissued some of those on vinyl.
They actually just issued, I snagged it. I'm super glad I snagged it quick because it sold out fast and now it is selling for hot money on Discogs. But Showbread's No Sir, Nihilism is Not Practical, they reissued, which Showbread was a huge band for me. They were towards the tail end of this era, I would say, but I loved them, and I got that on vinyl, and I opened it, and I put it on, and it was like I was back to being 14 years old again, and like going to Cornerstone and listening to this band play. It was so amazing, and I really do think that even if someone is not a major collector of vinyl, I feel like records just have this nostalgic quality that pairs very well with that era of music. So when I see things pop up that are being reissued, I'm like, oh man, I gotta get that. Yeah. But you go online and you look at, like, let's use MXPX for example. They issued a lot of their stuff original on LP in the 90s. It is so expensive. It's like Teenage Politics is my favorite record by them. And I guarantee you I'd probably have to drop close to $200 to get an original copy of it. I mean, it's so people are after it. People are after it. They just gotta nudge the, tooth and nail if you're listening. Gotta nudge it along. You know what I'm saying?
Publish some more. Yeah, publish some more and in larger quantities too. I mean, I think it could go a long way to, and also I think not just to reintroduce people to this era, but maybe even propel companies and record labels to invest in the next wave of these musicians, because I know that they're out there. I know that they exist, but they're not getting the kind of love that maybe they once did. I think, you talked about ska, and that just kind of reminds me, that was one of those where a lot of the faith-based and Christian bands were at the right place and at the right time. Because there were, like, you mentioned Five Iron Frenzy. There were really quality ska bands coming out of the faith-based, segment of music. I mean, I saw the Insiders and the OC Supertones, and I mean, and they were great. I mean, they really had an audience and a following. I think we need to I think the Christian music industry would do well to kind of figure out that next wave of musicians that falls into this category and go from there.
And I think that goes back to celebrating the bands that could encourage that. If you would shed more light on some of the bands that had this experience, these younger generations are gonna be like, hey, like, I really love MXPX, and I'm gonna write music like that because people are talking about this. Like it all circulates back. It all matters. But I remember seeing the OC Supertones. Who was it with? Switchfoot, back when they were nobodies. Like literally, I think they maybe had 1 or 2 records out at the time. Which I don't want to get on a soapbox about Switchfoot. John Foreman, I'm sorry if you're listening. But I prefer old Switchfoot to Beautiful Letdown. I think is what it's called. New Way to Be Human, stuff like that. I'm into that Switchfoot. But I think it was the OC Supertones, Switchfoot, and Skillet, maybe. Like back when Skillet.
That sounds like a lineup that would have been together.
Right, I know. Yeah. That's another thing that I think is interesting too. That has also happened. Speaking of Skillet, and I still very much respect Skillet, even though I don't listen to them as much as I used to. I think John Foreman is an awesome guy. I'm a big fan of his podcast. I love him to death, but they did something different. Whereas because they were a part of that scene back in the 90s, and with, their first album, and then Hey You, I Love Your Soul, and Alien Youth, like all of these really, really quality kind of industrial rock albums. And they just kind of decided in the mid 2000s, maybe they saw the writing on the wall, but they just like reinvented themselves.
Yeah.
And they never looked back, ever.
Yeah.
Never, ever. And that, to me, I actually took it, I still kind of find it insulting. I always say when they decide to announce that they're not going to be playing anymore, they do a tour for a farewell tour. I'm going to get a front row seat and I'm going to hold a sign up and it's going to say, John Cooper, I deserve to hear Alien Youth live. I've been with you this long. I deserve it. Because they never, it's like it's almost like they act like it never even existed.
Wow.
And I don't really get why that happened.
Yeah.
But there's a few bands that have done that. They kind of just reinvented themselves and moved forward, still doing faith-based music, just letting go of that whole alternative, not mainstream sound. And I don't really understand why.
Yeah, and that's why
they did that. But
and I guess, I mean, I think, whatever people's rationale is for making those kinds of moves, but it does make you appreciate all the more the bands that still stick it out and still make the kind of music, and even though they do evolve and they do change, but they appreciate what they did in the past. I think that's, those are the bands that it's always so interesting to hear that they're still doing stuff, and if they've gotten to a place where they can afford to do that, they can just afford to make the music that they want to make, and not make the music that they feel like is going to sell, and that's always great.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I have 3 rapid fire questions
for
you.
Shoot.
They're going to
be
kind of in depth. They're going to be kind of in depth.
Okay.
So I wanted to bring them up early so that we could kind of just chat about them. But the first question I want you to do, off the top of your head, I know it's going to be hard. Top 5 bands from that era for you. Top 5.
Stavesacre, Starflyer 59. Local guys, Dennis and Mars. I keep going back to them. Blindside, and was that 4?
Yeah,
I lost count. You know what? I'm gonna go Juliana Theory. Actually, I rediscovered. I kind of was going back into the vault, and I started listening. And I'm like, dang, there's some good music in here.
Yeah.
Just some catchy stuff. A little bit more pop, but yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's...
Well, Dennis and Mars kind of is too. I mean, Dennis and Mars
is... Well, see, when I first...
Sorry, Eric, but,
Dennis and Mars, so I tell you, my relationship with them as a band in terms of... So they're local guys here in Lakeland, and I saw them for the very first time. I was a freshman in college. It was the very first local show of any band type I had ever seen, because where I went to high school is teeny tiny place, and no music scene. I mean, zero. So I'd never been to a local show before, to a local band. I'd only ever seen bands like, in, stadiums or arenas or whatever.
Yeah.
And we saw, this was pre-Dennis and Mars. Technically, they were called Divine Child. And it was a tiny, it wasn't a club. I don't know. It looked like it was an abandoned place that they had broken into, and there was just a bunch of kids. And I remember very distinctly, it was the night that the Adam Sandler movie Waterboy premiered, which, you're a Lakeland, native. Waterboy, a lot of the scenes were actually filmed at Florida Southern College, and so
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that.
So that's new material.
So there are some scenes filmed in the religion department over at Florida Southern College, and so it was a very big deal that it was premiering. It was the same night it premiered, and it sold out. And I remember this like it was yesterday. Eric made the joke from the stage, you guys are all here because you couldn't get tickets to see Waterboy. And that was like the introduction. And I got their EP, and I just loved that EP, man. That was definitely not poppy music. That was talking about that earlier Stavesacre conversation. Like, that was music I had never heard before. I mean, like nothing else. And Holding Hands at 35,000 feet, that was just one of my... I actually think the CD stopped working because I played it so much. I just absolutely loved that album.
Yeah, we were big Dennis and Mars fans. The first time I met Eric, gosh, when was this? Last Christmas, 2019. A mutual friend introduced us, and I shook his hand and I was like, I have a DVD with you playing at Cornerstone 2002. And he was like, shut up. No, you don't. He's so funny, and he's so humble, and he's just so sweet, but he's got one of the coolest voices.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of listening to his solo project, Mr. ENC,
Mm-hmm.
and he has just got one of the most unique vocals I think I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And it's so ear-catching and interesting, and it makes you want to listen to whatever he's doing more. And I think that's why Dennis and Mars, if you knew who Dennis and Mars was, they were so intriguing, because he just had a way, and he's a great songwriter.
Yeah.
So he just had a way about him, but he's a great little dude. I love him to death.
I've met him a couple times, but I wouldn't say that I know him at all. But man, that Divine Child show really set the course for my college experience, because I was hooked. And I started going to as many local shows here in Lakeland, small club shows in Orlando and Tampa, almost every weekend, and sometimes twice a weekend, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, you did pretty good on that. Good job.
Sorry,
okay.
I interrupted your rapid fire questions, but
no, you're fine. You're fine. I like that. That's why it's rapid fire, but I knew there was going to be dissecting here and there. Okay, top 5 albums of that era.
Okay. Well, Speakeasy. That's the Stave Saker record, Speakeasy. I love Americana from Starflyer 59. That was my favorite of theirs. The self-titled Project 86 record I listened to. Holding Hands at 35,000 Feet.
You got one more.
This is like picking your children, right?
I know.
It's not quite that bad. Okay, so this is a band we haven't talked about, but I think this is, I don't know if this is one of my top 5, but this is one I keep going back to, is Point Number 1 from Chevelle.
Oh my God, yes.
That was when they were on the Squint label, which was the same label as the big band. Now I've lost it. Oh, the band that sang the song "Kiss Me." Remember that?
Sixpence None the Richer.
Thank you, Sixpence None the Richer. Thank you. They were on Squint Records, and so Squint Records was a faith-based Christian band label. Sixpence None the Richer was the band on that label. Chevelle was signed in like the polar opposite sound.
Yeah, for sure.
Dreamy kind of pop music.
I love Sixpence None the Richer.
Love them. And then you had Chevelle, which was much more, 3-piece driving rock band, right?
Yes.
The thing that Squint Records had that was annoying as all get out, if you were in the retail side, was the fact that they thought it would be funny or cool, I don't know which, if all their CDs opened the opposite direction.
I noticed that about I can't even think of the album that Sixpence did with "Kiss Me" on it.
that was,
and it's like backwards and all weird.
Backwards.
Yeah.
So was Point Number 1, and I can't tell you how many, very well-meaning parents bought either one of those records and brought them in, saying that there was something defective with it. Yeah. Like, no, hon. This is just
you could just blame the record label for this.
This is just the way they do things, and sometimes I would pop the cases and flip it around so it would work right. But that Point Number 1, I love that. I love that record.
I remember buying that at Family Christian Bookstore.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, you probably bought it from me because I kept that in stock because it was such a good like record and such a good album, and I just loved just the guitar tone. I just love that. Anyway,
and they're one of those bands that kind of drifted into the mainstream.
Oh man, they blew up. They blew up. They had the song "The Red." It was on the Wonder What's Next. That was after they left Squint. I can't remember who they went to next, but yeah, they that Wonder What's Next, I think they had a couple of songs that got pretty big. The Red was actually like on the Billboard, like may have been the top 100, maybe even bigger than that. And then This Type of Thinking was another big record, and then they kind of fell off just because that genre of music became less and less popular. That more hard kind of style. But man, yeah.
Point Number One is a great album.
Yeah.
Okay. My last one is top 5 concerts that you saw, live shows from that era.
Oh shoot. Okay, so I'm gonna say that Divine Child only because it was like the first like local one, and it really did change a lot for me for that era, and it really changed because I was not working at Family Christian Store at the time.
Right.
So I started going to a lot of little shows and stuff like that. So that really changed a lot for me. So that one, I don't know if they played with anybody else, if it was just them. I just remember them, and I remember that EP that they released. The MXPX show that I mentioned earlier with Newfound Glory, I couldn't tell you a thing that Newfound Glory played, but I just thought, I thought MXPX was just crazy good.
They are crazy good. They still are.
Yeah, they're crazy good, and it so impressed me. Just their stage presence and everything about them. Just everything.
What year was that?
This had to be like 2000, maybe early 2001. It was right in there at Janus Landing. So one of the other, me and my roommate, and actually a bunch of us, we went out to, and I don't remember who else played, but I remember the Insiders played at a terrible little place in St. Petersburg. The sketchiest neighborhood I think I have ever been in St. Petersburg. And I just remember we danced like crazy at that Insiders concert. And I'm not a dancer, but man, we were skanking like crazy. That was just an awesome. I saw, I'm going to lump all of them together into one, or maybe this might count as two, but every show I saw at the Sapphire Supper Club / The Social in downtown Orlando from 1999 to 2004. And I saw Juliana Theory, I saw Denison Mars, I saw Copeland, I saw quite a few local bands and not local bands. Those were just amazing shows. And
The Social still, to this day, to me, is one of the best curated venues.
Yeah.
They bring in some really solid music.
Yeah.
And their sound system is really great.
Yes.
So you feel like you're like right there with them.
It's
I still feel like they're a great venue.
It's such a tiny place too. I mean, and it used to be called the Sapphire Supper Club, sorry. And but yeah, I don't know how many, probably a dozen, maybe 2 dozen shows there over the course of 5 or 6 years. So yeah, I'll put all those together in one because I can't pick one.
So that makes up the latter half of your list. Did you ever attend like Cornerstone or Cornerstone, Florida, or anything like that?
I think I attended Cornerstone, Florida once or twice. I'm not a festival person. I just don't it's Florida, so it's hot. I don't enjoy, I mean, I like the bands and I get the whole thing, but I'm not a standout in the sunshine and bake to watch. I did go to Cornerstone, Florida once, and I think I had friends that were playing like side stages and things like that, and so we went out and saw them. They did a good job though. I mean, those were really
those were phenomenal.
And the lineups they would have were always pretty
incredible
and pretty impressive. And I think the whole festival, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with festivals in general, not just in the but it's curious to me that Christian music has moved away from festivals as the secular scene has moved more and more to festivals. I mean, they're expensive as all get out, though, I think, to run. So I think that may be part of it.
But you're right, though. There are so many secular, humongously massive festivals nowadays. Yeah. And there used to be so many Christian ones. And now there's like maybe two.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with how record labels have. So one of the really interesting things, I think one of the interesting things about the Christian music industry is that to a certain extent from the retail side of it, so I could speak to the retail side, I think they took advantage of the customers and the fans sometimes. And I think that has that shifted things. I remember very distinctly, and I think I've talked to you about this before, but we would release an album. So pick any big mainstream, middle of the road Christian album from that era. And it would go on sale for about a week and a half when they released it. It would be $9.99, which was a good price for a CD back then. And but then the very next week, that same record, that same album would be $16.98 or $17.98. I mean, on CD. We're not talking about vinyl, where you got but that was the standard. That was the standard price. That was the suggested retail price for every CD that came in. Now, when you had them on sale and they were $9.99 or sometimes even $8.99, those were okay deals. But across the street from Family Christian Store was Best Buy. Best Buy would have almost the exact same albums, and they would always be $9.99. And I remember there would be times where customers would come and they'd bring a stack of CDs, and about half of them would be at full retail price because we didn't mark down a whole lot, because the concept was they were giving discounts to pastors, and you remember the little click card, the loyalty card, and you get 10 or 20% off, which is I guess it's okay. And pastors, I think, would get 30% off of certain things and 20% off of everything else. But even with that discount, you're not even getting close to what Best Buy was selling those same albums for. And I would tell people, look, put this back on the shelf, go across the street and get this album for $8 less. And I remember having to convince people, this Family Christian Bookstore is predominantly owned by Zondervan. This is not a mission that you're giving to. You're giving to a business.
It's a corporation.
Yes, it's a corporation. And the people at the top are making a lot of money. And it's okay that they're making a lot of money, whatever. But if for your money, you regular person working, save the $8, go across the street. And if you really feel bad that you're not supporting a Christian corporation, give that money to your local church. Give the $8 that you saved to the local church, or to a mission that you really care about. And I think that was one of the big reasons I left, because I felt like there were times where the corporation would be taking advantage of people because of their faith.
Yeah.
Where the artists, I felt like, were trying to use where they were using their faith to positively influence their music, and that faith was informing their music and their decisions. I didn't feel like the corporation was always following suit, and there was still a bottom line kind of issue. And so I think some of those like festivals, the big kind of festivals, they were not, they weren't doing what they could do to keep the fans and the customers, excited about the music, because because a lot of those big Christian festivals were organized by, or partnered with Family Christian Bookstore and Zondervan and all that. And it's why there are no Family Christian bookstores anymore. I really believe that. I mean, I hate to say that, because I liked my time there and I worked with some amazing people, but I felt like from a corporate standpoint, they took advantage of the customer, and because I know that extra $8 wasn't going back to the artist.
No, of course not. The artists are going to be the last people to see that money.
Sure. And whereas in the festivals, and I think that's the other thing too, artists, they're going to gain a lot more. They're going to make a lot better living doing the smaller shows. And I think some of the artists pull out because, when you have these cornerstone festivals, you've got your top bill, you got your medium bill, you got your small bill, and you got your side stages, right? And the side stage people aren't making anything off the gate. No. In fact, they're paying oftentimes to be on on the
I
bill.
know this from experience because my brother, I don't know if you know this about him or not, but he actually, his band played the last Cornerstone, Florida. They played one of the side stage.
Yeah.
And they actually had to pay.
Yeah. Yeah, because
to play.
It from Cornerstone standpoint, they would say that's your publicity. You're getting you're getting access to an audience you wouldn't have otherwise. Those top bill people are making a something of a percentage of the gate, depending on how many top bill acts you have. If you start packing that bill more and more, for the fans, that might seem like they're getting a good deal out of that. But you're not going to be able to see. There's only so many bands you can see in a day.
Yeah.
Right.
You gotta pick.
Yeah. So I think ticket prices being what they were, I think that corporate mentality was not. The corporation should be informed by their faith as much as the artists are informed by their faith. And I feel like, and I'm judging, I have no insider information other than what I saw happening with pricing. Yeah. At a time where, I'm sorry, man, CDs should not be $16.98. They should never have been $16.98.
Even in their heyday, they shouldn't have been $16.98.
No, but they were still these. And I remember unboxing. I'm like, I can't believe we're labeling these $16 or $17.98, and there's 12 songs on this, and you're paying like.
That's probably why my brother and I ended up going home with stuff that we were talking about earlier, because we wouldn't be buying like the super popular ones. We'd be buying like the, how they used to do like the $1.99 samplers, and it would have like all the stuff.
Cheapskates, that's what we called them.
Yeah, like cheapskates, that's right. Or like there was another one that Corey and I had. And
Tooth and Nail had songs from the Penalty Box. Songs
from the Penalty Box. Yeah, we had some of those. Mm-hmm. But we would, my parents would make exceptions if we like loved the band. Especially for my brother, he got super into stuff. And he would like hardcore attach to them. And my parents would be like, okay, it's a new CD from Living Sacrifice. Yeah. We'll let you buy it.
Yeah.
But most of the time, my parents was like, no, you're not going to get something that expensive. So we would go home with all these random samplers. But that's kind of what was fun about them, is that you learned through listening to them, all these different artists, and it allowed you to cultivate a wider range of what you're listening to.
Oh, we love those samplers. I still love those samplers. We would get the $1.99. They would never send us enough,
Oh, sure.
And one of the things that was great about being the head of the music department is if there was a cracked case, you couldn't put it out on the floor, so you got to take that one home.
Yeah, you're like, okay, thank you.
So I had like the cheapskates, the two cheapskates ones, the hard side and the soft side. They had those two sides, and they would kind of. You talked about Stavesacre. One Stavesacre song would be on the soft side of the cheapskates, and then one would be on the hard side. You'd have like AP2, and you'd have like Sup the Chemist, which was like the BEC. They're one of the rappers that they had. But man, the samplers too. When we would have customers in like you, Jessi, and your brother, and they didn't have a lot of money, or they didn't know what they wanted. They sometimes you can't go in. You know how it is. You see this all the time.
Oh yeah.
People just coming in to browse. They want something. They want something new, and you'd get to hand them a sampler and say, man, this is a good bang for your buck. And then next time you come in, you'll know what you want to get, because you'll find one or two new favorite groups on this that you're going to want to get their full album. And man, I love those samplers.
My favorite samplers were the Seltzer samplers.
Yeah. Oh man, I forgot about those.
Seltzer 2 is my jam. I have a Spotify playlist that I actually like created the track list of Seltzer 1 and Seltzer 2. I listened to those all the time, because it was like 7-Day Jesus and Plank Eye and what else is on that? Like The Waiting, I think, is on one. Oh man, who else? Joy Electric. That's the first time I ever heard Joy Electric was on Seltzer 2 with Monosynth. That was the first time I ever heard them. And I loved Joy Electric. Yeah. Obviously, I named my podcast after it. But yeah, we loved those things. And my parents did not get rid of our CDs.
Oh, wow.
So they took them out of their jewel cases.
Yeah.
And they bought these two, when I say massive, like bigger than my head, they're probably like span my shoulder length size, like flip books.
Binders, those.
So there's like 9 CDs and one page, and then you flip it over, there's 9 CDs. And my parents kept all of those. So we have all of our samplers,
Oh my gosh.
all of our Christian music, all this stuff at my parents' house. So every once in a while, I'll like be in the mood to listen to something, and I'll call my dad and be like, "Hey, can you look and see if it's in that book binder?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, it's right here." And I'll swing by and grab it and listen to it or whatever.
That is awesome. Yeah, it'd be great to have, and maybe they do. I mean, you've created one, but like Spotify and Apple Music playlists that were these old samplers, and just as many of those. Now, some of them you can't find. Like some of the songs you can't get. Like one of my favorite songs off of the hard side of the Cheapskates sampler was a song by AP2, which featured Mark Solomon. And it was a demo version that they put on there, and I'm yet to be able to find that. I still have, thankfully, before I got rid of my CDs, I downloaded them to my computer, and then when Apple did this thing, and I don't know that anybody takes advantage of it but me, for like one yearly price, they match all those, they upload all those things to the cloud so you can have them streaming for yourself.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome.
But outside of that, I've never been able to find that song again. But man, I love those samplers. They were just so good. They're so good.
I got that idea for creating a playlist last year sometime. Someone brought in some CDs to sell at the store, and they had a copy of the WWJD sampler. And that one was never like my all-time favorite, but I have a lot of memories with that one because my dad was a massive Big Tent Revival fan.
Yeah.
So I was telling my part-timer, Aaron, I was like, oh my God, I listen to this CD all the time. And like, whatever, I haven't seen this in years. And I was like, I'm going to take this home. I'm going to listen to it. And I opened it and the CD was gone. Ah! And I was devastated. I was like, oh my God. And Aaron was like, and it was so brilliant. He's like, pull out the inner pamphlet thing, whatever you call it. I know the actual terminology.
The liner notes.
There you go. Yeah. And he's like, look at the track list and go on to Apple Music or Spotify, whatever you use, and just build your playlist.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Oh my God, that is so smart.
Genius.
Why I didn't think of that before,
Genius.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But so I did it, and then I was like, well, man, if I can do it with this, I can do it with all these other ones. So I just started building all these playlists.
Genius.
So when I'm in the mood to listen to it, now there, like you said, there are a few that
are hard to find. Yeah.
Yeah, they are. But but I the seltzer ones have always been my favorites, and I was like, I'm going to build the seltzer ones because those are my favorite. But now I've gone onto Spotify since deciding that I was going to do this podcast. I've been like trying to really, like, I've been listening to a ton of this music to really start getting myself refreshed on what, their albums and the artists and stuff. And there's some playlists out there that are just so good and playing music that I've never even really heard before. Wow. So people are still interested in it, and people still care about it. We just kind of have to dig for it.
Well, when you asked me to be on, I kind of went back to some of the albums that I hadn't really visited in a while, and I just like the Juliana Theory because I really listened to them a lot back then, but that was one that I haven't really stuck with, like Stavesaker, Blindside, even Project 86. I still go back to those. Man, I'm in a certain mood. That's it. Even to this day, I've had playlists with each of those bands. Like, I'm like, okay, this is the kind of, this is the kind of mood I'm in. So we're doing this. But then the Juliana Theory, I hadn't really listened to. And I'm like, that being able to go back and listen to that, and then just the flood of memories, and it's like being transported to the stock room at Family Christian Bookstore, and it's 2000, and I'm opening the box of CDs that's just come in, and that brings back so much.
I know. It's so amazing. And I hope that if nothing else comes of this podcast, I hope that maybe like a dozen people hear it and are like, I'm gonna go check out these bands, because I feel like it's an unforgettable snippet of time in Christian music history and Christian history in general.
Yeah.
And like you said, it cultivates so much, not necessarily because it's so smothered in Christian ideas, but because it cultivates faith. It doesn't necessarily, shove it onto you. It just encourages. And I really enjoyed that about it. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh man, it's been my pleasure. Thank you, Jessi. Yeah.
I'm so glad that you're here. More than likely, I'll probably ask you back because,
yeah.
Why not? Why not? We could probably talk forever.
There's so many bands we didn't even talk about.
I know. Well, maybe next time you come on, we'll narrow it down to 4 and focus on those bands. But thank you, Zac. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
We appreciate it so much.
My pleasure.